My child, pause here for a moment. Do not let your hand move away yet, because something has been waiting to reach you, and it has found you at the exact moment your heart is finally strong enough to hear it. You may think you arrived here by accident. You may believe this is simply another message passing across your screen. But deep within you, there is already a quiet trembling, a feeling you cannot fully explain, because your spirit recognizes what your mind has not yet understood. Someone you love has left behind words they could no longer carry alone. Words shaped in silence. Words written through hesitation. Words they almost erased before finding the courage to let them remain. And before this message is fully revealed, you must understand why they believed it might be their final one. I have seen the questions you hide when the world grows quiet. I have watched you stare into empty spaces while pretending that nothing is wrong. I have heard the conversations you replay in your mind, searching for the moment everything changed. You have wondered whether you misunderstood the connection, whether the tenderness you felt was real, whether the distance between you was created by time, fear, pride, or something neither of you knew how to name. There were nights when you told yourself to let go, yet something inside you refused to close the door completely. You tried to silence the hope. You tried to convince yourself that their absence was an answer. But your heart kept sensing an unfinished sentence lingering between you. That unfinished sentence is why you are here. Your soulmate has been carrying a truth that became heavier each day they refused to speak it. At first, they believed silence would protect both of you. They thought that if they stepped back, if they controlled their emotions, if they acted as though the connection did not affect them, then everything would eventually become easier. But it did not become easier. The silence did not heal them. It followed them into crowded rooms. It sat beside them during conversations with other people. It appeared in the middle of ordinary moments when your name was never spoken, yet your presence was somehow everywhere. They began noticing how often the world reminded them of you. A song would play, and suddenly they would remember something you once said. A familiar scent would pass through the air, and for one breathless second, they would turn around expecting to see you. They would hear someone laugh in a certain way and feel their chest tighten because it carried an echo of a memory they had tried to bury. Even the smallest details became doorways leading back to you. And every time they stepped through one of those doorways, they found the same truth waiting on the other side: they had never truly moved on. But there is more to this than longing. Something happened recently that caused them to see your connection differently. It was not dramatic in the way the world expects important moments to be. There was no thunder in the sky, no crowd watching, no grand announcement. It happened quietly, in a moment when they were alone with their thoughts and could no longer escape themselves. They came across something connected to you. Perhaps a photograph, an old message, a gift, or a memory preserved in a place they had avoided for a long time. The moment they saw it, the walls they had built around their feelings began to collapse. They remembered not only the love, but also the pain. They remembered the words they should have said, the reassurance they withheld, the moments when fear made them appear cold. They remembered how many times you tried to understand them while they remained trapped inside their own confusion. And then a realization came over them so strongly that they could no longer dismiss it: you may never know how deeply they cared unless they finally told you. That realization became the beginning of the final message. Do not misunderstand the word final, my child. It does not necessarily mean the ending your fear is imagining. It does not mean tragedy. It does not mean that all hope has disappeared. It means they reached a point where they could no longer keep sending half-truths through silence. They could no longer remain caught between reaching for you and running away. They decided that if they were going to speak, they would speak with nothing hidden. If they were going to reveal their heart, they would not soften the truth to protect their pride. This message would be final because after it, something between you could never remain the same. They began writing, but the first words would not come easily. They stared at the empty space before them, feeling the weight of everything they wanted to say. They wrote your name, then deleted it. They began with an apology, then erased that too. They tried to sound calm, but their hands betrayed the emotion they had been suppressing. They walked away, returned, and started again. Hours may have passed between the first attempt and the message that finally remained. Every sentence required them to confront a part of themselves they had avoided. They wanted to tell you that they were sorry, but sorry felt too small. They wanted to say they missed you, but miss did not explain the emptiness that followed them. They wanted to admit they still loved you, yet even love seemed unable to contain the depth of what had grown inside them during the distance. So they kept writing, searching for words large enough to carry the truth. And then they wrote something unexpected. They admitted that losing your presence forced them to see who they had become. Without you near, they could no longer blame confusion on timing or circumstances. They had to face their own patterns. They saw how often they withdrew when love became real. They saw how fear convinced them that vulnerability was weakness. They saw how they sometimes tested your loyalty instead of trusting your heart. They recognized the moments when they expected you to understand what they had never explained. This confession was not easy for them. Pride resisted every sentence. Fear whispered that you would judge them. Shame told them it was too late. But something stronger continued guiding their hand. They felt that if they did not speak now, the silence would become a regret they carried for the rest of their life. You must know this, their message was not written to manipulate you. It was not created to pull you back into pain. It was not a demand for immediate forgiveness. The person writing those words knew they had no right to control your response. For the first time, they were not asking what they could receive from you. They were asking what truth they owed you. That change matters more than you realize. There was a time when they wanted your love but feared the responsibility of protecting it. They desired closeness but panicked when closeness required honesty. They wanted to be understood without exposing the wounds they had hidden for years. You sensed those wounds even when they denied them. You recognized the sadness beneath their distance. You noticed the moments when their eyes revealed what their voice refused to say. And because your heart is compassionate, you often carried emotional weight that was never yours to carry. I saw every moment when you questioned your worth because of their confusion. I saw you wondering why love seemed to awaken so beautifully between you, only to become surrounded by uncertainty. I saw you blame yourself for changes you did not create. And I want you to hear this clearly: their inability to express love was never evidence that you were unlovable. Their final message contains this truth. They wrote that you were never the problem they tried to solve by creating distance. You were the mirror that showed them the parts of themselves they had not healed. Your love did not frighten them because it was wrong. It frightened them because it was real. It reached beyond their defenses. It touched places they had kept guarded even from themselves. When you looked at them with sincerity, they felt seen. And being truly seen can feel terrifying to someone who has spent years surviving behind carefully constructed walls. They thought distance would restore their sense of control. Instead, it revealed how deeply the connection had changed them. In the days that followed, they tried to return to the person they were before you. They filled their schedule. They distracted themselves. They spoke casually when others mentioned love. They may have even acted as if they were completely unaffected. But the soul cannot return unchanged after experiencing something genuine. They discovered that the version of themselves who existed before you was gone. You had awakened something, and no amount of avoidance could make it sleep again. This is where the message becomes even more personal. They wrote about a specific moment with you that they have never forgotten. To anyone else, it might have seemed ordinary. Perhaps you were sitting together in silence. Perhaps you looked at them when they were struggling and offered kindness without demanding an explanation. Perhaps you said a few words they did not fully respond to at the time. You may not even remember the moment clearly. But they remember it because something inside them shifted. In that moment, they felt safe. Not entertained. Not admired. Not pursued. Safe. For someone who had learned to associate love with disappointment, unpredictability, or emotional loss, safety felt almost impossible to accept. They wanted to move closer, yet part of them prepared to run. They feared that if they depended on your warmth, losing it would destroy them. So they created distance before you had the chance to leave. They believed they were protecting themselves. They did not realize they were creating the very loss they feared. Their message admits this. It says, in words filled with emotion, that they pushed away the person they secretly prayed would stay. They pretended not to care when they cared too deeply. They withheld reassurance while hoping you would somehow know. They watched you grow tired, and instead of reaching out, they became even quieter. They saw pain in your eyes and wanted to comfort you, but guilt made them freeze. There were moments when they nearly told you everything. They rehearsed conversations in their mind. They imagined calling you, appearing at your door, or sending one honest sentence that could break the silence. Yet each time, fear interrupted. What if you had moved on? What if you no longer believed them? What if the damage was too great? What if you listened and still chose to walk away? Those questions became chains. But recently, another question rose above all the others. What if you walked away believing you were never loved? That thought broke something open in them. They realized that even if you never returned, even if you never answered, even if the future did not unfold as they once imagined, you deserved to know that the connection was real. You deserved to know that your love reached them. You deserved to know that the tenderness you offered was not wasted, even when their behavior made it seem unseen. And so they continued writing. They noticed the silence where your voice used to be. They noticed how achievements felt less meaningful because they could not share them with you. They noticed that even on good days, part of them searched for the person who once understood the emotions behind their smile. They realized that what they missed was not only your presence. They missed the version of themselves that appeared when they were with you. Around you, they felt more honest, more hopeful, more alive. But the message does not ask you to forget what happened. This is important. They know love cannot survive on emotion alone. They know that longing is not the same as transformation. They know a beautiful apology cannot erase repeated wounds. Somewhere in their heart, they finally understand that if they want another chance, their actions must become different. This is why the next part of their message surprised even them as they wrote it. They began describing what they were willing to change. Not vague promises. Not dramatic statements made in a moment of loneliness. They wrote about the patterns they had finally recognized. They spoke of learning to communicate before silence becomes punishment. They admitted that honesty must arrive before fear turns into distance. They acknowledged that love requires consistency, not occasional intensity. They wrote that they no longer wanted to appear strong by hiding their feelings. They wanted to become strong enough to express them. But as they wrote these promises, they stopped. A painful truth came over them. They understood that you might read their words and feel nothing but exhaustion. You might have waited too long. You might have healed without them. You might no longer want the future they once assumed would always remain available. For the first time, they felt the full reality of what their hesitation may have cost. They cried then. Not because they wanted pity, but because the truth finally reached the place pride had protected. They saw that love is not something one can repeatedly delay without consequence. Hearts are not waiting rooms where someone can leave and return whenever fear subsides. Your patience was a gift, not a guarantee. Their tears fell over words they had struggled to write. And still, they did not stop. They wrote that if your path no longer leads back to them, they will carry gratitude for having known you. They said your love taught them what sincerity feels like. They said your presence exposed the difference between being wanted and being truly understood. They admitted that before you, they had confused attention with devotion and chemistry with emotional safety. You taught them that real love can be quiet, steady, and deeply transformative. They also confessed something they had never said aloud: they compared everyone to you. They tried not to. They knew it was unfair. But whenever someone entered their life, they noticed what was missing. They searched for your depth in conversations that remained on the surface. They searched for your warmth in gestures that felt rehearsed. They searched for the way you noticed small details, the way you sensed their mood, the way you offered care without making it feel like a debt. No one was you. Yet this realization did not immediately bring them back, because knowing who matters and becoming ready to love that person are not always the same journey. They had to confront themselves. They had to understand why they sabotaged what they valued. They had to see the difference between loving you and being emotionally prepared to stand beside you. This inner work has only recently begun to become visible. Someone close to them noticed the change. This person may have watched them become quieter whenever your name appeared. They may have seen the sadness behind their attempts to seem fine. One day, they asked a question your soulmate could not avoid: if you still love them, why are you acting as if you do not? The question struck deeply. At first, your soulmate gave the usual answers. Timing. Complexity. Uncertainty. Things that happened. Things that were said. But the person listening did not accept those explanations. They asked again, more gently, are those the real reasons, or are you afraid they will see how much power they have to hurt you? For a long moment, your soulmate said nothing. Then they admitted the truth. They were afraid. Afraid you could reject them. Afraid you could look at them and see every mistake. Afraid they had waited too long. Afraid that apologizing would require them to surrender the last defense protecting their pride. But the person beside them said something that changed the direction of the entire conversation. They said, silence is also a choice. And one day, you may have to live with what that choice took away. Those words followed your soulmate home. That night, they could not rest. They imagined years passing. They imagined hearing that you had built a life with someone else. They imagined themselves smiling politely while carrying the unbearable knowledge that they had never told you the truth. They realized that rejection would hurt, but regret might remain forever. That is when the final message truly began. It was no longer a casual attempt to reconnect. It became a confession, an apology, and a release. They decided to tell you everything, even the part that made them feel most exposed. And my child, this is the part you have sensed without knowing. There was a reason their distance became stronger at the exact moment your connection seemed ready to deepen. Something happened behind the scenes. A conversation took place. A fear was triggered. Someone's words touched an old wound in them, and instead of coming to you for clarity, they allowed doubt to grow in silence. They were told something about you. It may not have been entirely false, but it was not the full truth. It was shaped by assumption, jealousy, misunderstanding, or someone else's limited perspective. The words planted a question in their mind. Rather than asking you directly, they began observing everything through the lens of suspicion. Small things appeared larger. Delays felt intentional. Ordinary moments seemed like proof of something that had never been proven. They wanted to trust you. Part of them did. But another part, already wounded by the past, prepared for betrayal before betrayal had occurred. This is not an excuse. Their message makes that clear. They admit they should have spoken to you. They should have trusted the connection enough to ask. They should have given you the chance to explain what they only understood through another person's voice. Instead, they withdrew. They became colder. They allowed you to feel the change without knowing its cause. And you blamed yourself. You searched through your memories, wondering what you had done. You became careful with your words. You tried to repair something no one had explained. Perhaps you reached out and received little in return. Perhaps you stopped reaching because rejection began to hurt too much. Either way, the distance grew around a misunderstanding that honesty could have prevented. Recently, your soulmate discovered something about that conversation. The person who influenced them did not know as much as they claimed. Important details had been left out. Motivations were misunderstood. Your soulmate began seeing inconsistencies in the story they had accepted. Then another piece of information surfaced, and suddenly, the entire situation looked different. They realized you may have been telling the truth all along. The moment this realization came, they felt both relief and devastation. Relief because the worst thing they had feared about you was not what it seemed. Devastation because they saw how much damage their silence had created. They understood that while they were waiting for proof, they were losing the person who had been honest with them. This discovery is included in the final message. But they have not told you everything yet. There is one detail they hesitated to write because it reveals just how long they have known the truth. They did not discover it yesterday. They have been carrying it quietly, trying to decide what to do. Each day they delayed, the guilt became heavier. They watched from a distance, wondering whether you still thought of them. They looked for signs, but they were afraid to trust what they saw. They may have checked something connected to you more often than you realize. A page, a photograph, an old conversation, a place where they could feel close without risking rejection. They told themselves they were only curious, yet every visit left them more emotional. They looked for evidence that you had forgotten them, but part of them hoped to find the opposite. Sometimes they found nothing, and the silence frightened them. Sometimes they saw something that made them wonder whether it was meant for them. This uncertainty pushed them closer to sending the message, but one final obstacle remained. They did not know whether reaching out would bring healing or reopen a wound you had worked hard to close. They were afraid their confession might be selfish. They asked themselves whether they wanted to speak for your peace or merely to escape their own guilt. That question forced them to rewrite the ending. The first ending asked you to come back. The second ending apologized and disappeared. But neither felt honest. So they wrote a third ending, one that placed the choice in your hands. They said they would not pressure you. They would not demand an immediate response. They would not pretend the past could be erased by a single message. They only wanted you to know the truth before life carried both of you too far in separate directions. Yet just before sending it, they added one more sentence. A sentence they had avoided from the beginning. They wrote, "There is something I never told you about the last time we were together." My child, this is where the energy around their message changed. Until that sentence, the message was about regret, fear, misunderstanding, and love. But what followed connected everything to a moment you may remember very differently. Your soulmate has carried a secret about that final encounter. Something they saw. Something they heard. Something they almost confessed. Something that explains why their behavior changed so suddenly afterward. They have replayed that moment countless times. They remember where you were. They remember your expression. They remember the sound of your voice. They remember how close they came to telling you that they had already made a decision about the future. You believed they were uncertain. You believed they were pulling away. But the truth is more complicated. Before that meeting, they had planned to say something significant. They had imagined your reaction. They had prepared words. They may even have carried something with them, a symbol, a letter, or